Welcome everyone to this is Rusty Russell's session, and he is from Blockstream, and he's going to be talking about C Lightning. So Rusty, you can feel free to take it away.
Sure. Okay. First, I want to apologize for the camera angle. This is the XPS, and Dell didn't want to ruin the beautiful bezel with a camera, so they put it down the bottom. So you get to like look up my nose for the next like 50 minutes. Okay. And second apology is. This talk may be a little chaotic. So what I decided to do is demonstrate one of the really cool features that's coming in 0.8, which is going to be released soon. And of course, inevitably in preparing this talk, I stumbled across a whole heap of really fun corner cases that I had to fix. They are all fixed and merged as of this morning, so I think we're good to go. But if any of the ghosts of those bugs haunt us, we will have an interesting experience, which is all part of the fun. Okay, so here's the plan. What we're going to do is, like I did with the last Bolt-A-Thon, and I don't know if any of you were here for the last one. Basically, start from an empty directory. Let's go. Let's grab C Lightning, install it, set it up. Talk a little bit about configuring. That's going to take like about 5 minutes. It shouldn't take very long at all. But feel free to interrupt with questions if you have specific questions. And then we're going to go into kind of pretty advanced plugin writing. We're going to use Python. Because while there's like a few different ways you can write plugins, the Python stuff is probably the most mature and simplest, kind of on that axis of simple and mature. And so we're going to play around, and we're going to do some things that are, and I'll hopefully highlight these, that I definitely wouldn't recommend doing in production, but it does show you the power of some of the stuff that you can do, and it certainly gives you enough rope to shoot yourself in the foot, as they say. So with that, let's begin. I have a file called plan.txt, which tells you kind of everything that I'm going to do. We're going to start by cloning the repo. So a lot of people just, particularly if you're doing like bleeding edge stuff, it's good to use the master branch because it's obviously latest up to date, which means full of new features and full of new bugs. So, it's supposed to be fairly stable, but normally you'd be running a release, but because I'm going to be playing with some of the experimental features or the stuff that's coming in the next release, we need to do it this way. So I've got my Lightning directory full of source. If you look in docs install.md, there's like, all the requirements. In particular, there's like what you need to install on Ubuntu. And of course you need Bitcoin D installed. So, you can do that a few ways. Here's a PPA that works. So I won't actually do that because, of course, I've already got everything installed. This is my dev laptop. Okay, so the next thing to do is configure. Now, you can just type configure and then make, but if you want some extra developer options for C Lightning, you type enable developer. Right? It gives you a whole heap of dev commands that can do nasty and dangerous things, which can sometimes be useful when you're playing around like this. So we don't actually need it for this tutorial, but force of habit, I do that. You can also do enable experimental features. This enables a whole heap of stuff, depends on the release, as to what's tagged experimental. Kind of undocumented stuff that's coming in for future releases. So we specifically flag things that we think are dangerous, mainly things that affect the network. And experimental features. For example, multi-part payments in 0.8 is an experimental feature at the moment. Christian Decker is our release captain for this release, and he will make the call on whether to turn that into a normal feature or leave it as experimental for the 0.8 release soon. We don't need experimental features, and they don't get as much testing, of course, as normal features. So I'm not going to tempt fate with the demo gods by enabling it now. So there we go. It's doing a configuration step, and then it will do the standard build. This will take a little bit because it has to grab the packages that the submodules that it needs. So we will have a couple of minutes of me talking at the screen here. But I really do like to start from scratch because it's a kind of a useful thing to show. It's really not that hard. Like, literally copy these commands and you'll end up with a fresh install. Okay, now once we've built it, what we're going to do is we're going to use a script in the contrib directory, which contains, the contrib directory contains a whole heap of contributions of miscellany that we didn't know where else to put. And there's one called startup ratetest. And this we'll literally start up Bitcoin D in ratetest mode, which is like kind of a local, there we go, we're finished. So contrib, start up ratetest. For those of you who don't know, you can type source or you can type dot, which is the same thing in shell. That means basically just load up that file, load up those commands now. So you run that, it figures out where Lightning CLI is, it figures out where Lightning D is, and it gives you a whole heap of commands. In particular, it gives you one called startln. Oh, okay, something went badly wrong. Oh, okay, I've got some Lightning Ds already running. Oh, Lightning D from a previous run. Let's kill that, pretend that didn't happen. Just in case, we'll stop ln. Okay, cool. So pretend that didn't happen. We type startln, it starts up Bitcoin D, and then it just gives us a few canned commands. So it started up 2 nodes. They're not connected to each other. Call creatively L1 and L2. And you can type L1 CLI to feed commands to L1, L2 CLI to feed commands to L2. You have stop LN just to shut everything down. BT CLI just asks the Bitcoin D stuff. So there, basically, you've got like a test network in a can. That's great for this kind of stuff. Okay. Now it actually creates these temp directories, L1 ratetest and L2 ratetest. And if you look in there, it puts a log file, it puts a config, it has a PID file. So if we cat that PID file, PS tree 755, no, sorry, 775. Okay. You can see here's the Lightning D, and it fires off a couple of subdaemons. This is Connect D, Gossip D, HSM D, and also all the plugins. In this case, we have 3 plugins that are the built-in ones: Auto Clean, Fund Channel, and Pay. These used to be built into C Lightning itself, and we kind of spun them out as plugins as the plugin stuff became more powerful, and we had lower level stuff that they could basically work in terms of. So that's how Lightning D runs. One other thing that's changing in 0.8, if you happen to be poking around in this stuff, is everything's moved down a directory, except for the PID files and the root level config. Everything's moved into a ratetest directory. That's new. It means that you can run from the same Lightning directory, a ratetest one, a mainnet one, a testnet one, whatever you want. They will be in separate directories. So it was a pretty common question. How do I run multiple? You used to have to specify completely separate directories for them to run in. Now they'll happily share the same directory. Okay, cool. So let's get ourselves some funds. We'll ask for an address from L1. Right, and the first thing you'll notice, the JSON response has actually got 2 redundant elements in it. And the reason for that is that we switched a few versions ago from just supplying an address to specifying exactly what address to supply. But for backwards compatibility reasons, we don't remove fields. Well, actually, we do. We have 6 months of deprecation. So when you're testing with stuff, you should always turn all the deprecated stuff off to make sure your stuff is ready for when it finally does get removed. The way to do that is to edit the config. So let's edit temp L1 ratetest config and say allow deprecated APIs equals false. Okay. Now we do our stop ln. We do our start ln again. Cool. Now let's ask for that address again. And these days we get like, this gives us a modern style. We just get the bec32. You can explicitly say to new address, actually I want a P2SH address, but by default it's bec32. Okay. Now let's get Bitcoin to give us some money. In ratetest mode, you can send to address, that address that we have. Let's give ourselves 0.1 test Bitcoin. So we're test rich. There we go. That's the transaction ID. Now we have to tell Bitcoin D to actually mine it. Now, in ratetest mode, you actually have a generate command, like basically produce me a block, which is great for testing. You have to give it an address to send the output of the Coinbase to. So we send it back to itself. We tell it to generate just 1 block, and we give it an address that it gets ourselves, a new address. So this basically asks Bitcoin D, hey, give us an address, and it generates a block to it. All done. Now, if we look in list of funds, oh, we have a question, Andrew.
Yeah, just real quick. Is there a way to like automatically generate blocks on ratetest, or do you have to manually do it every time?
You generally manually do it. You could certainly like write a little script that just generates one every 60 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever. You know, it's trivial to do. But you can also tell it like generate me 100 blocks. You know, so I mean, ratetest is kind of designed for that. Testnet is more like you actually have to do some mining to generate blocks. And of course, you can always test on mainnet if you really want to. But you know, ratetest is good like that because you can explicitly control exactly when blocks are generated for testing all kinds of crazy stuff. So, so I enjoy it. If we do list funds, there we go. We can see we've got our output. Its value is that. These days, we tend to print about our values in explicit MSAT amounts for standardization with the MSAT tag at the end, because you know on-chain values are logically in Satoshis or in BTC. And Lightning values logically in millisatoshis. So we decided to go, no, let's go millisatoshis everywhere. But again, we can't, you know, we don't want to remove existing fields and break software. So hence you've got the amount MSAT fields. You see the MSAT fields all over the place. Okay, cool. So we've got our funds. This means we can establish a channel and fund a channel. Now in 0.8, actually fund channel will try to connect by default. It used to be you had to connect manually and then you could do fund a channel. Unfortunately, because our nodes are completely independent of a real network, Fund Channel won't be able to do that because it won't know the address of the other node because there's no gossip yet. So we still need to do the old-fashioned connect. So let's find out what's L2 CLI, get info. Okay, you can see the randomly generated name here with the version number because it's a development build. Okay, so if we tell L1 CLI to connect to that at localhost 9090, oh, I can type properly, localhost 9090. Cool, it's connected. Let's fund a channel. And let's fund a channel with 0.01 BTC. So this is part of the value stuff, is that while the default number will be in millisatoshis, in this case will actually be in Satoshis, an explicit suffix like PTC, MSAT, or SAT does exactly what you'd expect. So you can specify it any way you want. Oh, the other problem with ratetest, of course, is fee estimation is broken. There are no real blocks. There's no real fee estimation. So in this case, you do need to tell fund channel, no, this is the fee rate to use. So 1,010 per kilobyte, if we want to do the old style. There we go. It's generated. It's done the negotiation. It's started that channel. Of course, again, we need to actually mine some blocks. And if we want the channel to be fully public and gossip, we need 6 blocks. So we're going to get Bitcoin to just mine out 6 blocks for us, if only it were that easy on mainnet. And if we do a list channels, you will see. Oh. Okay. Why do I have no channels? Okay. L2 CLI. My channel succeeded, right? I did the fund channel. List channels. Okay. Right. Oh, okay. So one of the issues is that it polls Bitcoin D every like 30 or 60 seconds. So you can get a kind of a delay. You generate the blocks and then it takes a while for Lightning D to twig to that and pick it up. So there we go. That's why there are no channels the first time. Okay, so here we go. We've got our channels. Every channel is duplicated because there's things of it as 2 sides, this way and this way. They're kind of independent at this point. Okay, so you can see it's active. It does not yet consider it public. Let's mine another block. There we go. And again, it will take about 60 seconds, and eventually that channel will be considered public and all good, ready to broadcast. Not that it matters. We've only got 2 nodes. Who cares if it's public? Okay. So now we've done that. We've set up our test network. You can write a script to basically just do all that for you out of the can and make things a lot easier. If that's the configuration you always want, you can actually make much more complicated configurations if you want. Now we're going to make a plugin. As I said, we're going to be using Python. And the easiest way to do this, if you haven't pip installed everything and you want to use the Python from your Git branch that you've got is to actually set Python path to contrib/pyln client. There is a Python package called Lightning that's kind of been deprecated now. Let's fix the typo. And these days, it's basically, that's a thin wrapper on top of pyln client. We're going to use pyln client directly just to be cool and modern. And if we look in our documentation, plugins.md, this is the description of all the plugin APIs. And we're going to use one called RPC command, right? And this is the root of this talk, right? There is a plugin hook called RPC command that basically lets you take over any RPC command. Every time somebody puts in an RPC command, which is how everyone interacts with Lightning D, you get to intercept that and do whatever you want. You can reject it, you can accept it, you can change it. This file tells you the format to expect. You'll get method parameters, and you can say how to respond to it. Okay, this one may actually be out of date because I thought I edited the documentation to include the ID. Okay. Let's see, if things crash, then I will switch to my other version, which is current. Okay, right. Cool. Now, I have a very simple test.py. I have a very simple plugin to write, which I pretty much took from the demo plugin that's in the test directory that exercises this RPC command hook. Now, there are two ways to load plugins. Well, there are actually several. One, you can do it at runtime. You can actually tell it using the L1 CLI, plugin load, a plugin start, and give it a full path, just to temporarily load a plugin. You can put it in your config and say, hey, load this plugin. But what I usually do these days is basically, if you have a directory called plugins, it will just try to load every plugin in that directory. So let's create our test.py. There. Now, it needs to be executable. That's how it tells the difference between README files and real plugins. So we'll make it executable. And we can do L1 CLI plugin rescan. Okay. Now, this is showing the kind of thing that happens during development. I've actually screwed up because although you saw me set the environment variable here, I didn't set that before I started C Lightning. And so it doesn't have that environment variable, so it almost certainly barfed on this first from pyln client import plugin line. Okay, so if we look in the logs, it doesn't tell us anything useful. That's not very helpful. Okay, let's stop L1. Let's stop ln. Restart everything. Our channel, of course, is persistent. It will stay there. And now, plugin help. How do we do it? There's a list, plugin list. Cool. And you can see, because it was in the plugin directory, it loaded it automatically. So there you go. Now, let's look at the plugin itself. This line here tells us that it's setting the RPC command hook. So basically, intercept every RPC command. And all it's doing is basically logging it and then saying continue. So let's look in our log file and look for plugin test.py. There you can see it received command plugin. Well, that was me typing. Let's grep for test.py. There we go. Okay, so list configs, get info, list configs. These RPC commands are actually the plugin infrastructure itself querying C Lightning during setup. So it's intercepting even those and does get info and all those things. So if we type, let's do the simplest command, ping, right? Which was missing a parameter, but it doesn't matter because it still went through the hook, right? So if it's a valid command at all, it goes in through the hook, and then afterwards it actually sends it to the real command if it says continue. So, okay, so our hook seems to be working. This is good step. If we go back to our plan, okay, let's add some fun to our plugin. Let's set a ban command, right? So we'll add an option to our plugin called ban command. And basically it will just fail if you try to use that command. Now we can do some fun ones here. Let's stop ln. Let's edit that config file. Temp to config. Let's ban command list channels. Why not? Okay, cool. Start ln. Let's see if our plugin does its work. Oh, did I call it ban command? I did. Oh, okay. I edited the wrong file. That helps. Let's fix that now. Plugins desktop. Yes, we're right. Okay, cool. Let's do a rescan. Let's do a stop and a start. This time, no error. Okay, cool. Let's test it. Let's see if we can do a list channels. Nope. We get the error back straight out of our plugin hook. Okay, cool. So, so that can be fun to make people's commands randomly fail. You can make them fail on Tuesday, whatever you want. Not particularly useful, but it gives you a taste for the stuff that we can do with this hook. Okay. I will see line get info. Cool, good. Right. So every other command still works. You can see there. Now let's do something a little bit more interesting. What we'll do is take our test.py and replace the hook again. Okay, so now this is a bit tricky. We're basically going to take over the invoice command. So basically, we pull the command, the method that they're asking for out, and if it's not invoice, that's cool. We'll just continue and keep going. And then we pull out the parameters. Now, JSON RPC is like JSON-RPC.org has a whole definition of how this works, but you use two styles of parameters. It could actually just literally be a list of ordered parameters, or it could be a dictionary of like keyword, like parameter name, and then the value. So we kind of have to handle both if we're messing with people's arguments here. We print it out because it's always good to log what's going on when something fails. If it's a list, then basically what we're going to do is we're going to see if the first value in the list, because the way invoice works, if we do a L1 CLI help invoice, right? It takes a millisatoshi amount, a label and description, and a whole heap of optional args, right? So what we'd like to do is accept a number of cents, right? So instead of saying invoice them for like this many millisatoshis, it'd be cool to be able to invoice someone for like 38 cents, right? So if I look at test, I'm missing a part of this, so I will just copy this one, test step 3. Okay. Right. I'm going to just copy some boilerplate in here that I will need, unfortunately, to do the actual conversion to cents. Now, obviously, you know, a more serious plugin would do this differently. But if we look down here, basically, we're looking at that amount arg. Either it's the first arg if it's an array, or it's literally called msatoshi if it's not. And basically, if it ends with a C, then we're going to actually just in place replace it with the converted value. And if it doesn't end with a C, then we'll just continue. We'll just pass through, right? And if they do invoice without any arguments, obviously we'll pass through and all that stuff. So basically, what this does is it does conversion on any amount ending in C, and then the hook itself returns a replace and basically says, replace what I was doing before with we can actually just do RPC command, RPC command, RPC command, right? So basically it just says replace it with the one that I've got, right? So it's almost the same except that we've taken out the sense. Now we've got a conversion function up here, which is basically boilerplate Python. It's kind of dumb. Every time you do an invoice, it basically does a new HTTP request to convert it to the sent amount in USD in this case to a millisatoshi amount. In real life, that's kind of a dumb way to do it. You'd probably have a thread that polled and everything else, but we wanted a simple example. So this pretty much converts a number of cents to, ideally, an amount. Now, we can do a rescan. Right. Oh, actually, we can do a plugin stop, test.py, and plug in. Then we do a rescan. It will load it up again. Okay, it loaded. So hopefully, if I've done this right, we will be able to do L1 CLI invoice. Okay. Now, we know we can do like 100 MSAT invoice for like foo, right? Okay. But let's see if our new thing works. Let's do a 100-cent invoice. Okay. Right. That pause there was it actually reaching out for the HTTP request. Plugins themselves are quite fast, but doing an HTTP request from Australia is quite slow. Now, what happened is it did not actually convert. So let's see why. Did Rusty do something dumb? I think Rusty did something dumb. I replaced args. Okay. Let's dig into this a bit. Let's look in our logs. What did it say? It said it converted 100 cents to this many MSAT. All right. It printed out the args. It's all good. Okay, I shouldn't mess with this example. Let's stop it. Restart. Scan. Okay. And let's try do. Okay, yes, that's what I thought. I'm missing the ID parameter. So this is the first time that I crashed this hook, is that it used to just, instead of saying if you're missing ID when you give it the replacement, it would literally segmentation fault. So good to know that's been fixed. Let's do ID colon RPC command ID. So when you do the replacement, you have to give it a full valid command replacement, and every command, JSON command, has an ID in it. So we'll pull that back out. And let's see if that works. Okay. Again, we stop, we rescan, and let's see. Okay, we got our valid invoice. Now, let's just check the amount. It turns out that invoices are actually kind of human readable. LN means lightning. BCRT is Bitcoin reg test. And the next is the amount, followed by a 1. So the amount is that many pico Bitcoin, that's what the P stands for, which is 10 to the minus 12. So it's that many millisatoshis, because that would be 10 to the minus 12, 10 to the minus 11. Let's just trim it. It would be that many satoshis. And we know that at $10,000 a Bitcoin, a Satoshi is 100th of a cent. So it's about, if it were $10,000 Bitcoin, it would be 132 cents. Bitcoin's slightly less than that. So this is actually a valid, it seems like the correct amount, right? It's around 132 cents. If it was 10,000 Bitcoin, it's probably about 100 cents today. Okay. So there was an example of using a hook for something kind of useful. You can extend commands in a way that's basically transparent to all the users. And because we chose the C, which would never be a valid use either way, normally, it doesn't disrupt anything. But this does kind of give you an insight into the danger of using this hook, right? You know, all the commands are documented, everyone knows what they do, unless you start playing around with the RPC command hook, in which case you can make them do anything you want, right? In this case, we've done something pretty harmless, but you know, you can completely customize the commands, even the existing commands, to change them. Okay, so let's get back to our plan. Yeah. Oh, and if you're, an RPC command hook is kind of important and kind of delicate at this stage. It's pretty early. If you give it a bad response for a while, it would actually just kill Lightning D. Most of that's been fixed. But if you mess things up badly enough, you probably could still make a mess of things. If you replace the ID or something like that, whatever's making the query would get a different ID response back and often get confused. So this is really a powerful hook that should be used with caution. But, you know, I know a lot of us were feeling that the things in Lightning world were getting too boring and we wanted something more experimental and reckless. Yes, Andrew, do we have a question?
Yeah, so like what would you recommend would be like the best practices when you utilizing like the RPC calls? Because you just, yeah, it seems like it can be a pretty powerful exploitation.
Yeah, so this is one of those areas where, so DeRosier, who's one of our community contributors, who's fantastic, wrote this hook. And we looked at it and went, oh crap, that is such a huge foot cannon, right? I mean, you could really do a whole heap of, you could really screw things up using this. But sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes you literally want to do something that's really invasive, that really does change the rules. So we decided cautiously to let it out. We talked about making it experimental or developer only. And then we went, no, you know, the ability to do wild and you know, reckless things is also the ability to do some wonderful and amazing things. So we've got it out there. We haven't built up much in the way of best practices. I would recommend not messing too badly with things. One demonstration that I was going to try to prepare but didn't get time for was actually to use this to change the defaults. Have a generic default plugin where you could say, actually, I don't like this default arg to invoice. I want that to default, if it's not specified, default it the other way. And then it would literally go through and read the commands and go, oh, hold on, you haven't specified that field for invoice, it's optional. I'm gonna manually put it in there so that it changes the default behavior. And that's actually something that someone has asked for, like how do I change the, can I globally set the defaults on a command? And generally you can, but sometimes it's sensible. In particular, the invoice command here, by default, the invoice command will put inside the invoice like a route hint of how to get to your node. But if you have public channels and private channels, it won't use a hint on the private channels by default. If you only have private channels, if you're creating an invoice, you're gonna need a hint there, right? It's implied that you obviously want them to pay you since you're preparing an invoice, so it will use them. But if you've got some public and some private, it will refuse to expose any of your private channels through the invoice command. Now, there's an option to change that, and I had a user who said, well, can I change that globally? Because I always want that. I have a private channel that I've opened with LNBig. I really want to use that capacity, have that considered. And unfortunately, the answer was no. Like you've got to, and it's like the fifth parameter. So like you end up, you know, typing these command lines with like none, 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 or, you know, null, 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 nil, 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 whatever it is, right? You end up specifying all these blank ones you don't care about, leave them on the defaults, and then change this one to true. So having a generic thing that would change the defaults would be incredibly powerful and really useful, and something that actually I'd like to work on after the 0.8 is released. So you can do some really great things with it. But yeah, it is also a foot gun. And we're going to keep going down that path, and I'm going to show you some of the damage that we can do.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do have one more question.
Oh yeah, another question.
Are a lot of developers putting contracts or business logic in plugins, or building a layer on top of C Lightning?
Yeah, so there's basically two ways to approach adding business logic. One is to put it inside a plugin, which has some advantages. Plugins are managed by C Lightning. So if C Lightning's up, your plugin's up, right? It does all that. You can dynamically control them from C Lightning, and it's a seamless API. So the same way you control stuff through C Lightning, you can also now access your plugins, your business logic, and change those. So we have seen that model. The other way is to do it in front of C Lightning and basically always go through your business logic to reach C Lightning and effectively build a layer on top. It really does depend on your use case. If you want to build incrementally, plugins can be really good. You can add like one function at a time. And as you'll see, you can actually replace existing functionality using this RPC command hook as well, which gives you more ability to customize. So in fact, that brings me to my next example, which I think would probably be in real world, probably would be better implemented as a front end that controls access, like a proxy. But we're going to implement it using the RPC command hook here because that's what my talk's about today, and also because, you know, it shows you some of the things you can do. So, so yeah, business logic inside plugins, I think, is an excellent way to do this. Plugins are full processes. They can have their own databases. They can do their own work. They can do almost everything you want anyway.
It sounds really flexible too.
Yeah, flexible and dangerous. So
Yeah,
you can't be powerful, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Let's move to, okay, so I've decoded it. That's all good. Now, what I'm going to do is do a more aggressive hook. And this one is kind of interesting. So what we'll do is, I'll save you watching my typing. We get rid of most of the stuff we've had before, except for plug and run. Okay. Now it's worth noting that these plugins are all very simple. You also have an init hook in a plugin that you can do work when you start up. For example, I said we would actually, and if we were doing this seriously, we would use a thread to poll every like hour or so for the exchange rate. That's something you set up in the init function, right? These plugins are pretty elementary, so they don't have an init function at all. Okay, so this variant of the plugin is going to basically require a secret on almost every RPC command. And our secret password is going to be secret because, and so what it does is it looks at the command. And now there are a couple of things, as I said, when we looked at our logging from our RPC command hook, the plugin infrastructure itself calls a couple of RPC commands to set up, in particular, list configs and get info. Now, if we start requiring a password on those without going in and modifying the plugin infrastructure, it's all going to break horribly, as I discovered myself. So we're going to give those a pass. If you're asking list configs or get info, that's fine. Just continue true. Otherwise, again, we have the two styles of parameters. We have a dictionary where they're keyword value pairs, or we have just a simple list. So in the case it's a dictionary, we basically say, hey, there's got to be a member in the dictionary parameters called password. If it isn't, we throw back an error saying you need the password. And then we compare the password field to the secret password. And if it's all okay, we just delete the password field out of the arguments so that we can hand it on to the real command. And notice when we call replace from here, it doesn't come back into our hook again, right? It just goes on straight to the direct command. So we never end up to deal with recursion in this case. And of course, the other case is where it's simply a list, in which case there has to be more than one of them, or more than 0 of them. And it has, the first parameter is presumably the password, and then we just delete the first parameter. And then we just throw back what we've got left of the request into replace. Okay. So that's our plugin. Let's rescan. Actually, sorry, let's stop it and rescan. There we go. Now let's try our invoice command. Need password. Okay, let's try our secret password. And then, of course, it passes through to the real command, which then says you don't have enough arguments. So let's do something a little bit useful. List channels. That will fail. Add password. Oh, sorry. Add password afterwards. There. That worked. Now, if we do it by keyword, so you can convince the CLI. Oh, sorry, Andrew, we're going to have a question?
Yeah, just another question that someone from the conference had is like, what are some neat plugins that you've seen recently?
Oh, okay, cool. That's like a wide open field. There's a couple of collections of curated plugins that are floating around. There is a Lightning plugin repository in the Elements project. So hold on, let me just open a new window. I pull up a browser and go to Elements, Lightning plugins. Where is it? Plugins. There we go. Cool. So sorry, in the Lightning D repo, there's a whole heap of plugins, and we have a number there that are somewhat curated, but there's also a whole heap of other ones. One of my favorite plugins actually is Reckless, and Reckless is by DeRosia, who wrote the RPC command hook. And we're kind of slowly growing Reckless into a plugin manager. So, if you feel, again, that Lightning was too boring and what you really want to do is start running code from random people on the internet with your real money, You can use Reckless to install plugins. That it will search and install plugins. You can give it URLs, and it will just drop them in your directory and go. So we're working on Reckless. I think my hope is that eventually Reckless will be shipped with C Lightning as our official kind of plugin manager. It's going to take a few more iterations to get there, but that makes it easy for you to say to people, hey, just Reckless install the summary plugin and a few other really useful ones. Summary is still one of my favorite plugins. I run it on all my nodes. I wrote it. It's basically a much more human readable get info that gives you like a high level summary of all your channels, how much, total funds, stuff like that. A one-click URL for people to connect to your node. Simple stuff like that. But you can see here, there are a whole lot of, a rebalance plugin to rebalance your channels. Persist channels, which basically if a channel closes for some reason, just tries to reestablish it. Simple donation page plugin, auto reload, which is somewhat, now we've got dynamic plugin support. Really isn't required anymore. You see me like loading and unloading plugins dynamically anyway. And there's a whole lot of like different plugins that people are writing. So there is some really exciting work happening in plugins. But a lot of them are just like simple things that people want for their own, own random purposes. In particular, I tweeted out a plugin that basically reproduced a command that we had deprecated. And after 6 months had passed, and we finally did the release, we're about to do the release, that actually removed the deprecated command. It turned out that Spark, the remote C Lightning wallet, was actually still relying on that. And they hadn't yet shipped their new release that upgraded. So I wrote a very trivial plugin that just redirected the old command name to the new one. It was basically a very simple wrapper. Didn't even use the RPC command hook. And that fit in a tweet. So you can actually write kind of useful plugins that are really, really small these days. And of course, that was like useful for about 4 hours before he actually shipped the new version of Spark, and we no longer need it at all. So yeah, we are seeing this growth in like the plugins that people are writing. A lot of people playing around for their local stuff as well. And they range from trivial to some quite complicated stuff. But I'm hoping that once we get Reckless better integrated and that becomes more of a common thing, it'll be like first install Reckless, and then you can just use that to install, manage, and upgrade your existing plugins. And that'll really kickstart like a lot more infrastructure play. Cool. Okay, I think I answered that question. Cool. If there's nothing else, let's look on. Okay, so I talked about the two styles of parameter passing. The CLI command, so interestingly, the Python plugins actually by default use the keyword style, dictionary passing. But the CLI by default just uses this list style, JSON list. But we can force it to use a keyword style or a dictionary style by either putting keyword equals value, and then it kind of guesses that that's probably what we want, or explicitly putting a -k option to say, do it that way. Again, you can see that it works. If we don't specify it, and we specify like, let's do help. I can't even remember how list channels works. I can't run help either. Secret help. Oops. Okay. Well, that told me what I wanted to do anyway. I will do list channel password equals secret short channel ID equals, what was my short channel ID like? There we go. So here, if I don't specify the password, but I specify that, again, I need the password. If I specify the wrong password, which I didn't test before, secret 2, it will tell me the wrong password. So you should generally, if you're playing with parsing, make sure you test both the keyword and the non-keyword version. Because this is pretty raw, you still have to open code that. We may well come up with something inside the plugin infrastructure that does, command mangling for you, which would be a lot nicer. If you want to get really sophisticated, you can use the help option to probe and figure out what the command names are and convert from list style into dictionary style that way, which makes it a lot easier to manipulate. I didn't do that because it was easy to cut and paste the code for here. Okay, so we've shown how you can add a password to everything. Now, this would be a kind of a dumb way to implement security because, of course, if you can access the RPC file, by default, you're running as the same user. You could just, you could access probably the file that contains the secret in this case and read that. You could also access the HSM secret file and just take all the funds. So this is pretty terrible security. If you wanted to do this for real, you'd probably write a plugin that set the permissions on the, I'll show you here. There is a socket here called Lightning RPC. And by default, you can tell it's a socket because it starts with S here. It's readable and writable only by the user. You could have a plugin that adds that to make it readable and writable by the group and allow access to that from some other process that was running as a separate user but was in the same group. So you could still control who could access the socket, but you could run a whole heap of plugins or other utilities in a completely different user ID. Particularly if you're using that layering model of business logic, so you had a layer on top, that could run as a completely different user. You can then fine-grain control what it can access. It wouldn't be able to read the HSM secret or anything else, but it could read, or actually it could read the database. So you probably need to expose this somewhere else, or you may want to change permissions on the database and stuff like that inside your security module plugin. So it would make sure that only the other group had permissions, and then you could implement password control like this if you wanted to do it that way, okay? The other way to do it, of course, is to write a proxy that selectively exposes only certain commands. But you could certainly do both. If you wanted to have an extra layer of security, you could require a password that the proxy would presumably know, and then require them only to access the proxy. And the proxy could expose things over HTTPS or whatever else. The rest of your logic could be run on a completely different virtual machine, for example. So, so don't think just adding a password in here, like I've done, cut and pasting my example, is good security. That would be terrible security because everyone would just read it out of the file. Okay, so that shows you the RPC command hook replacing a command as it comes in. But what if you want to replace the response from the command? So what if I wanted to change it so, I don't know, so list channels didn't list some channels, for example, or something like that. And the RPC command hook itself can't do that. But what it can do is redirect and change the command itself to point to a new command that does the filtering that you want, right? So you basically, you rewrite it to divert to an alias that does the filtered thing that you want. Now, this was the second place where I ran into a whole heap of fun bugs. And it turns out due to reentrancy, you can't actually have that other command inside the same plugin. The alias command needs to be in a separate plugin. So I will show you that. And this will be kind of our last example. This is called test step 6.py. And it looks like this, test.py, our now pretty familiar command hook. So again, there's a whole heap of like hard cases that are called by the infrastructure itself, and we just pass those through. But for everything else, we look for, oh, real command. This has got a typo in it. Okay. What happens by default is that we change the method to custom, and we have our own custom plugin that will handle that. So we're basically redirecting everything into this custom plugin, and then we're adding a parameter. We're nesting the existing parameters inside the parameters to the custom argument, and we have a real command argument that has a command that they're actually trying to get to. Now, of course, what the custom thing does is basically redirect, in a lot of cases, the real command, and that's going to come back in the hook again. It's something, okay, well, and we don't want to keep going around in a loop. So what we look is, we go, hold on, if there's already a real command in here, then we know what to do. We just substitute it back and send it directly through, rather than sending it back out to custom and go round and round in circles. So let's look at custom. And custom is actually kind of interesting. This is our custom command. And basically, it it sees if there's a command called custom dash whatever the command they were trying to get. So custom dash list channels, whatever, by calling help. Now help will throw an exception if it doesn't exist. But if it does exist, then it goes, cool, the real command is called custom dash whatever. And then it just calls that. Okay. So we've got one plugin directs to another plugin that looks up something and does some work. It's a little bit confusing, but let's write this into our directory. So it's got access to both plugins.
We do have,
and then we have, yeah.
Can you make protocol level changes with plugins? And for example, could you create a custom payment channel that use non-standard commitment transactions?
Right, okay. Oh, can you go that far with plugins? The answer to that directly is no. At the moment, you cannot, you can make protocol level changes. You cannot change the HTLC operations. It's something that Christian Decker's really interested in. He wants to be able to, for research and stuff, to be able to directly inject and receive messages between peers on the stream, but we don't have that capability yet. It's definitely something that we want. In 0.8, there's the ability to send custom onions. So for the encrypted format, you can override that and you can send your custom things, whatever. And on the receiving side, you can intercept those, even if C-Lightning doesn't understand them at all. Even if C-Lightning thinks it's complete junk onion, as long as it can decrypt it, it will still send it to the hook, the HTLC accepted hook, and you can do your magic in there. So you can do both sides. That is how he implemented the WhatsApp chat, for example, is all in plugins. But that's only for the onion encryption. We can't do it for other things. But that's certainly something that we're eager to be able to do. The question is how to do it cleanly. Again, of course, it's a huge foot gun. If you can inject random crap into connections to peers, you could get things very, very confused very fast. But it is a really useful and powerful thing to be able to do, and similarly to intercept all the traffic coming back. Okay, so let's write custom.py, chmod all plus x, custom.py. Okay, if we stop and rescan, it won't let me stop it without a password. Let's plug in secret stop. There we go. Now it's stopped. We should be able to reload without a password. Rescan, sorry. Cool. Now, let's do our list channels command. It works, right? Oh, okay. It did not load custom for some reason. Why not? Okay. Oh, because I put it in the wrong directory. Okay, let's move custom into our plugins directory where it belongs and rescan. Oh, and of course now I've broken everything. L1 CLI stop. Okay, it won't even stop at this point, so I stop LN. So I broke it completely by having it redirect to a custom which didn't exist, and it went, ah. Okay, so, and there we go. Oh, I've still got the config file. I've got that ban equals list channels. I've taken that out now. Stop LN, start LN. Okay, cool. So now, if I create a, and this is my very last example, step 6. If I create a custom command called, oh, let's do list funds. Okay, cool. Okay, this is start.py. Okay, so now I've created a custom list funds. I will rescan. Rescan. Okay, you can see my custom list funds command, which just implements a custom list funds. And now if I do list funds, it transparently has noticed I've got a custom list funds and replaced it with that one. If I stop that, stop custom list funds, it will start working again. There we go, it's back to normal. So now I can override any command just by writing a custom dash command, right? So and I can add and remove them dynamically, and it will automatically now get redirected to those if they exist. So you can see what I mean about it being powerful. In particular, I could replace the route command. So if I want to do my custom routing on some heuristic, some experimental heuristic, I can replace the custom route command by writing the route command by writing a custom route command, and the pay command uses the route command. So it will automatically then use mine instead of the built-in one. Now, in future versions of C Lightning, we're going to have more sophisticated ways of overriding built-ins. But you can do that today, or at least in 0.8, by using this RPC command hook to manipulate things in this way. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rusty. It's not. I guess it looks like Andreas Antonopoulos is in the chat, and he says this is very cool.
Yep. Excellent.
That's awesome.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, Rusty, thank you so much for doing your demonstration. This was super insightful. Plugins just sound like really cool, and thanks for being honest about the dangers of like the hooks. But I love your perspective on it. How like sometimes like beautiful things come out of it. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I look forward to what people do with it as well. It's always exciting to see what people write. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that. And hooks are something that we add over time. So if people have something, oh, I really wish I could do this more cleanly, or it becomes a common thing, or there's something that you simply can't do, like injecting random stuff at protocol level. That's definitely something we're adding over time as people ask for it. So if you hit limitations, then please make sure we know about it.
Yeah, and another comment says the plugins capability is such a huge thing. So they're echoing our sentiment. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming. Just as a reminder, we have our last session with Rockstar and Britt Kelly from BTC Pay. So they will be on. You can still buy tickets to that and join us in that session. Thanks, Rusty.
Cheers.